Hello, everyone. It's Shane Conto, your Wasteland Reviewer, and welcome to the Wasteland, my weekly show where I take a deep dive into a particular film, to continuing my series on Martin Scorsese in its infancy, because we still got like 30 something movies to go. Going to be riding high into June. But Jim here, my fellow movie club member, is here, and we're going to be chatting about Mean Streets tonight. So, Jim, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Shane. Always a pleasure.
Of course. And before actually, still don't know what we're going to be watching for the movie club this month for October, but Alex is going to figure that out. But we know what we watched for this show, which is Mean Streets. But before we jump into the feature, so this show has three parts. We have our coming attractions, we have our main feature, and then some recommendations for all of you. And starting off with our coming attractions for Friday, October 1st. So, Jim, what is the film that you're most looking forward to coming out?
So I think I watch more animated movies than most people my age, unless they have most single people my age.
Yeah.
All my single dude friends are probably not going to be watching the Addams Family too, but between my little brother and my nephews and nieces and the nostalgia and just, it's the Addams Family is kind of a blast from the past for somebody I'll say our age. I'm a little bit older than you, Shane, but you know who the Addams Family is.
Well, because I've watched the show before, and then especially in the 90s with the two live action movies that came out. I think they're like Hallmark Halloween films to watch every October. So
sure, of course. I remember I was in church choir, and people whoever was on the piano kept playing the da 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 da, and the whole choir was snapping along, and I had no idea what they were doing. I must have been, 7 or 8 years old. So that was my church choir was my introduction to the Addams Family, and so far I see good reviews from the what we got on the books, at least so far. So that's what I'm excited about.
Yep. It's going to be coming out in theaters specifically because it has some competition this weekend with Hotel Transylvania Transformania, both trying to capture that, look, it's October time, so watch an animated movie, except that got bought by Amazon, so that's going straight to Prime. So at least this one, if you want to take your kids out, want to take the family out to go see a movie this weekend, go see Many Saints in Newark with all your kids, right? But no, so they'll probably be going to see Addams Family. And I love the Addams Family. Wasn't a huge fan of the first one of these movies that came out, but it's coming out. I'll be seeing it this weekend, so we'll see how it goes. But my pick for this weekend is The Many Saints in Newark, which is interesting because I've seen only 2 seasons of The Sopranos. And
really?
So I'm only 2 seasons into it, but I remember hearing about this, and it has a great cast. I love Alessandro Nivola, Vera Farmiga, John Bernthal, got Ray Liotta popping up in it, Leslie Odom Jr., Corey Stoll, and it's just and then James Gandolfini's son playing a young Tony Soprano. And it has a great cast. It seems like a solid mob movie. And I was watching the trailer for the first time and just thinking okay, I could dig this. But once that theme song hit at the end of the trailer, it just took it to a whole other level for me. I don't know why. It's a really awesome theme song that they have for The Sopranos. And it just kind of because I'm only 2 seasons in, but I'm hooked. The Sopranos is a really intriguing show. And if this could capture that same kind of complexity looking at the mafia, because Tony Soprano isn't your standard mob boss. And it's just him going to therapy and having a lot of dealing with emotional issues, have a lot of mommy issues. Oh my God, his mother in that show. But it's interesting, and it's going to be interesting to see. I'm going to be watching it on HBO Max Saturday night with my brother, my other brother John, and my fiance Jess. So that was one of the movies that was it was October rolling around. My brother's we need to watch this together. And so it's this. I feel like I have to watch Bond with him if I can make that work next weekend, and then 100% going to see Halloween Kills together, because He was living in North Carolina at the time. The first one came out, so I didn't get to see it with him, but we were texting each other because we both saw it at the same exact time. So there you go. But yeah,
So you got a big family weekend coming up then.
yes, it's a lot of family movies to enjoy together, like Halloween Kills and of course James Bond in all 2 hours and 43 minutes of No Time to Die. I'm ready. But October's pretty stacked, so there's a lot of stuff to look forward to because like the rest of the weekend we have Titan, the Palme d'Or winner from Cannes this year, coming out. Venom, Let There Be Carnage, which seems to be getting better reviews than the first Venom, but like that's still not great reviews, but like better. So I don't know. I'm ready to see two giant CGI blob fight. So we'll see.
I've still got to catch up on the first one, so maybe I'll watch like the Venom originator first, and then I'll watch Carnage after. We'll see, but I'll definitely also see No Time to Die.
Yep,
and then I'm waiting for Dune this month for sure.
Yes, Dune, like, well, and that's a tough thing because like in a vacuum, Dune would be my obvious most anticipated movie this month. Because it's like, this is Denis Villeneuve. This is like a big deal. But like, I've been a Bond fan since I was 8 years old. And like, this been literally 6 years since Spectre came out. And I'm like, I need this movie at this point. And then I'm a huge Wes Anderson fan, and The French Dispatch comes out this month. And I'm just like, it's a good month for movies. So it's a lot of good stuff. So
yeah,
hopefully everybody's going and enjoying them. So, but a lot to look forward to in coming attractions, but we're here to talk about Scorsese, and which has been interesting watching his first two films that I had never seen before. I hadn't seen Boxcar Bertha. I hadn't seen Look Who's Knocking at My Door. And this is like, I had seen Mean Streets before this once, and this is my first time coming back to it. And I don't know if I watched it at the right time. It's been interesting because I've definitely seen some Scorsese movies before I think I was ready to see them. Because I saw Raging Bull in high school and hated it. Hated it with a passion when I saw that in high school in cinema class. And like I rewatched it again and have a very different perspective on it. Because I remember being in a 16-year-old just being like, this movie's just cursing and yelling. Which it is, but there's a lot more to that cursing and yelling. But
right. That's one of my criticisms of Mean Streets. But I think Scorsese was figuring some things out and kind of hit a peak with Raging Bull. I get the feeling it's like one of those movies that you'd compare to any Hemingway story, really. Reading it in high school, I don't think a lot of high school kids can understand a Hemingway story, especially Old Man in the Sea, which was what I had to read in high school. And how could you possibly have an appreciation for what had been and what could be, and kind of, lost youth and ambition and all these ego, like all these things in, a very, very short story. I thought it was super boring when I read Old Man in the Sea as a kid. And I think Raging Bull, I'm only going to gain appreciation for as I get older. This movie, not so sure. I think I'm a little more conflicted this time around. Also, my second viewing. My first time watching this movie was for a college level film class.
Okay.
But it was not a film class per se. This was a combination history and film class, mostly presided over by the director of the library at St. Bonaventure University. So he put a selection of like 25 of his personal collection in the library. And I came to it like a week late. There were only 6 or 8 films left. And I just picked this one because I knew who Scorsese was. And I think the things that popped out at me the first viewing popped out at me even more now because I wrote a paper on it. That's probably why.
Yeah.
But I also feel like I have some criticisms of this movie too.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's like this was the first one of the three that I've watched so far that it feels like this is a Scorsese. Like,
right, there he is. You can recognize the trademarks of
yes,
of Scorsese.
There's a couple moments where specifically like the tracking shot through the strip club, like walking behind him, going through the whole entire thing. You're walking behind Harvey Keitel. He starts getting up on the stage and he's dancing and everything. And it was funny because I was watching those with Jess. And basically the two things that were popping out to her was how many times like, hey, hey, hey. And it's just like, Italian people being Italian people. And the second Jumpin' Jack Flash started playing, she's like, oh, there's the Rolling Stones.
There it is.
That push in on Harvey Keitel as Jumpin' Jack Flash starts playing, I'm like, oh, this is Scorsese. There it is. Like,
there it is.
And this felt like that first film where it's like really clicked, like this is his style. And you get that shot and then it cuts across and it like pushes in on De Niro walking in without his pants on and doing his whole entire thing, which it's so interesting that this film still hits on a decent amount of the religious themes that his first couple of films hit. Because like there's multiple moments where it's like, where do you meet Harvey Keitel's character for the first time? Is sitting in a church. Charlie's sitting there. It's that shot up at him in the pew and everything. And there's one particular quote that stuck with me during this movie, and it's him having his interactions with the love interest of the film. And she's like, he compares himself to St. Francis. And she's just like, St. Francis didn't run numbers. And it's just like, it's that, you're Italian, you're religious. What are you? If you're doing like these kinds of things, and it's like, like The Godfather, where the baptism with murder, like montage cutting back and forth. And it's just like, that's like a trademark of like showing that hypocrisy of like, many Italian people are very, very quote unquote religious. And then you have these kinds of things. Cause like, this isn't I wouldn't say this is like a mob movie, but like they're crooks. Like this is a crime movie. And, it's in that vein where it's just like, you're being put in a place where it's like, should I really like these people that we're going around with? And, Scorsese being Scorsese, challenging you to see if you're going to actually connect with them.
Right. Yeah, this is obviously a really autobiographical, it's a very personal film for Scorsese, right?
Mm-hmm.
So on that note, I feel like he does put emphasis on certain things that he obviously was inspired by somebody he knew or some event that he saw in his life or something, but really doesn't need to be in the movie,
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. We could talk a lot more about that, but I feel qualified to comment on this movie only on the grounds of like being a Catholic growing up.
Yeah.
Like not Italian, not from New York City. Didn't marry into a family like this, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And not a film critic, amateur at best, right? But the Catholic stuff really did resonate with me. So like if anybody asked me what this movie was about, first and foremost, I would say it's about Scorsese's adolescence, let's say. It's a coming of age story for Scorsese, right? But it's also about Catholic guilt. Like this story is about Catholic guilt, right? There's no other reason for him to stick with Johnny Boy to the end that other than making amends with the Lord, right? So like that I related to a lot more on the second viewing. I don't think all the religious themes really were, I really understood them at the time, because it's not something you really, if you grew up Catholic, right, it's not something you stop to think about until maybe you've given it up like I have, or you've gotten some perspective on life, which I think just happens as you grow up you know.
Yeah.
And Scorsese was still really young when he did this movie.
Yeah, because this was like what, 72, 73, somewhere around there. I think it was
I think
73.
73.
Yeah, because like I was just trying to think like in context of where cinema was here with like some of the actors and stuff like that. Obviously, this was Keitel's second leading role in a Scorsese movie, which is interesting because I don't feel like Keitel gets a whole lot of recognition as like the first like Scorsese lead, because then it's just like De Niro just takes complete control over, and then of course you get Leo later on. But like it's interesting because you have Harvey Keitel who's still young and doing things, and like thinking about where Robert De Niro was at this point, he failed to like get a role in the first Godfather because he wanted to be Sonny, which is interesting that they wound up choosing James Caan to play Sonny in The Godfather over Robert De Niro, who auditioned for the film. But then around this time, it's like he got to be in The Godfather Part 2 and won an Oscar for it for playing a young Vito. And so like this is a big jumping off point for him. In like a couple weeks I'll be talking about Taxi Driver, and it's just like that's where it's like De Niro took over and just skyrocketed in with Bad and New York, New York, and Raging Bull, King of Comedy, and then obviously like he still led with Casino and like obviously jumped decades and being in The Irishman. Which I think one of the interesting things is like his first film is very Catholic guilt centric. Boxcar Bertha has some really in your face Catholic imagery. Like there's legitimately a crucifixion in it. And it's so interesting because like these have been so infused of like the crime, but also the religious perspective. And I feel like those kind of themes and ideas have kind of split along the way, because like Scorsese has his mob movies, which I don't feel like deal as deeply with religion as his earlier films, but then he specifically has films where he is exploring his religion, whether it's The Last Temptation of Christ or Kundun or Silence. And so I think that's interesting that like those things kind of broke away from each other, and he kind of went down different paths with different films.
Yeah, I think it's for the better. I felt like this movie was a little bit, it was very messy. Like there was so much going on between the setting, which has like a life of its own. I mean, this is a New York City during this festival of San Gennaro, which don't really understand why. I don't know if you have a theory on this. I don't know why he set the film during that festival. You've got the whole mafia thing kind of growing up in an Italian-American mob run. I don't know if this was a Sicilian neighborhood or if this was like a Neapolitano neighborhood, but like one of the two, right? Like this is the capo runs the neighborhood basically in this place, right? And then you've got this very personal religious conflict going on, and it really was too much. Like that's really my biggest criticism of the film. Like any college professor sitting down with like an understudy, it's like got to narrow it down. There's too much going on here. You got to narrow it down, narrow your focus.
And you didn't even bring up the part where it's like it has a romance in it either.
I felt like that was extraneous. Yeah, I really did. I think for Scorsese, if this is a really intensely personal film for him, cocaine and women are like, an alcohol, I guess, as well. Those are the temptations that he that he sees. Because like there's that one scene where he's watching the black stripper and he's into it, and then he feels guilty and then he questions himself. It's like this circular kind of back and forth he's got going on in his head.
It's funny because Jess made a comment about the first thing that he said and like how disgusting and gross it was, and then I don't think she was paying attention, and then he continued to talk, and where he kind of like talked himself out of the prejudice there, and it's just like, but like, you know, it's like that snap bias that pops up there, because it's like growing up in a very Italian family, it's just like those prejudice and biases are there. And it's very interesting with that perspective, because like obviously they don't dig too deeply into it. And they only like, I feel like Scorsese only like hints at those kinds of things in his films. Like there's a teeny bit of that in Goodfellas. And like I feel like the movie that he goes the most into dealing with like racism and stuff like that is Gangs of New York. And the whole movie goes sideways in the third act, trying to focus on that and then completely missing like what you spent the past like 2/3 of the movie trying to build up. And which I feel like that's like you're talking about this movie being like a bit overstuffed and trying to focus on too many things. Gangs of New York. Way too many things. But I feel like this film is so interesting in the fact that it's like you have some really talented young actors here that go on to become some of the biggest actors. Like this is De Niro, and like it's so interesting. He's so scrawny. He has like the moppy hair, and I'm just like, wait, what? I remember watching this for the first time and just like, is that Robert De Niro? And seeing him as like Johnny Boy, who's like he's that character in the like crime movie where he's like the loose cannon, and of course you have Charlie, who's the one who's trying to like have a plan and stay focused and like ordered by rules, and like this is what we do, and like Johnny Boy over here is just doing whatever the hell and getting him in trouble. And then obviously leading up to a pretty like affecting and intense finale of the film where it's just like, well, who saw that one coming?
Yeah, it was right. It was definitely coming. It was thrown off a little bit, I feel like, by his editing choice, maybe the pace, but also the editing choices. Like part of the Scorsese brand, like you mentioned that scene where De Niro comes into the bar, he's walking towards Harvey Keitel, they're playing Jumpin' Jack Flash, slow motion, right?
Yes.
And so like I of course thought of the scene from Goodfellas when it's De Niro, right, who's sitting at the bar, Jimmy, and he's figuring out who is sitting at the bar he's gonna whack. Like he's got to kill somebody who's sitting at that bar. And they're playing some other classic rock song, but it's like very similar. So that's very on brand with him. But I don't think he quite figured out. You can see brilliance there in like this song, this doo-wop song, say Be My Baby, like with the opening credits
of the film. Yeah.
That works really well. But the timing I thought was just a little off. Same thing with like later in the movie when they're in the car and we doing spoilers for this?
Generally,
towards the big climax of the movie.
Like, yeah.
Okay, towards the big climax of the movie, basically another upbeat, old-timey kind of doo-wop song comes on, and it really contrasts with like the subject matter that's happening. Mm-hmm. So kind of the same way you said earlier, you said he likes to contrast like what was it? Anyway, with this really upbeat music with like really messed up subject matter, basically, right? That has become like definitely a Scorsese trademark, right? But the timing of it, I don't feel like it landed. You know, like one moment we would get the seriousness of what was going on in the movie, and the next moment, like there was a joke or somebody be laughing on screen, probably Johnny Boy, you know, like it kind of went back and forth, and I didn't feel like there was a consistent tone to it. So I think Scorsese was kind of messing around with that too. And I don't think he had it all quite firing on all cylinders. So I'm not as big a fan of this movie as I think a lot of Scorsese people are, you know?
Because I feel like this is the film that's like, this is the blueprint, this is the start of what you get out of a lot of Scorsese films. Because like watching Boxcar Bertha last week was even more of like, there's like hints at where Scorsese hear it, but like that was like, you turn a fire hose on, it's just like whipping all over the place. And it's just like, just throwing it all out there. And like, I felt like this film reined it in a bit and was a little bit more focused. And but still, there's a lot going on here. And like and I feel like there's a lot of films of his, it's like I don't feel like a lot of films that he makes really capture like a meaningful relationship in them. And it's just like I don't feel like love stories are really like Scorsese's bag here. Cause it's like unless you're trying to do something really disturbing and messed up, and then then he does it well. Cause it's like Taxi Driver, which is very uncomfortable and very unnerving. And then you have just dysfunctional marriages in like so many of his movies, whether it's, you have Raging Bull, you have Goodfellas, you have Casino, and you have, especially with like Sharon Stone and Robert De Niro. And this felt like laying that groundwork of like, you're never going to see a healthy marriage in any Scorsese movie at this point. It's like, and this obviously wasn't a marriage, but like this relationship here. And like, I felt like it built up to a very raw and just like in your face and very aggressive climax of like that whole like messy situation between like Charlie and Johnny Boy, and with building up. And I thought that was interesting because I felt like this film accelerated a lot at the end and just like went right into the finale. And obviously you see that Scorsese violence and just like up that right at the very end. And you see that domestic violence, because you see a lot of domestic violence in his movies, because there's a lot of very, like I said, uncomfortable relationships that you see in his films. And I think one of the biggest things that I noticed about this film in terms of some of the conflict, it's really like Charlie trying to balance, like he has these ambitions of doing these things. And I know you brought up like the Catholic guilt getting in the way, but also that like dutifulness to people close to him. Because it's like, if he really was following his ambitions, he would have kicked Johnny Boy to the curb. Because like, not good to be part of this whole situation. But like, he just couldn't do it. And look what happened.
Yeah,
and
it's kind of hard to tell like how much genuine affection he feels for Johnny Boy.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of my questions going in, and I noticed during that scene the bartender the look on the bartender's face kind of helped answer this question for me. He owes the bartender a lot of money too, but the bartender loves him. He came in without his pants with the two girls, and the bartender, I forget his name, I feel bad, but he's just he loves it. So like there is genuine affection for Johnny Boy. I don't know how much Charlie has for him specifically, and how much he's doing this out of guilt or out of his feelings for Teresa. Like it's complicated. Give props to Scorsese for kind of making the motivations very murky here.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think a lot of people get that deep into this film, but because they're all probably coming to this film out of Casino and Goodfellas and The Irishman, right? Or they're like, I don't know, they're looking at this as like an art piece or something like that. I don't think a lot of people really see the religious, the depth of like the religious themes that Scorsese has to work with here. But you mentioned the violence, right?
Yeah.
I remember reading somewhere, I don't remember where, that Scorsese's dad told him once that sex and violence sell. So like, I don't remember if this was when he first started making films. It was probably before this movie, but it kind of feels like there's really no need for strippers. There's no need for naked women. The violence in the climax, maybe. I feel like that was coming the whole time.
Yeah.
But like, I feel like he took those words to heart. If it was his dad that said it to him or somebody else, I don't know. But he definitely took those words to heart, I think.
Yeah, because it's like thinking about just getting a little bit of perspective on where Scorsese was and where he goes from here, because obviously he has made a lot of films, and I'm going to be talking about a lot of them, and trying to get up his filmography, because like he technically has like 70 directing credits.
It's a lot of credits,
which not all, like a lot of them are like short stories and stuff like that. But
I'm trying to access my notes that I had from the movie. So if I disappear for a second, I'm just gonna airmail it to my tablet so I can see,
because like
what I wrote down here.
His next feature is Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, which is like a drama and a romance with Ellen Bernstein and Chris Christopherson, which is interesting. So as I was just talking about how he doesn't do romance. And then like 76, he has Taxi Driver. And that's like where it really blows up. New York, New York. Raging Bull in 80, the King of Comedy, After Hours, The Color of Money, Last Temptation of Christ, Goodfellas in 90. And it's very interesting because like this is the kind of film that gives him that reputation of like he just makes mob movies. He makes those crime movies. But like he's done a lot of different kinds of things, and he's like, I'm going to be doing some of his documentaries as well, with like The Last Waltz, the concert film, Shine a Light, the Rolling Stones concert film, does documentaries. Like the next film I'm going to be doing is Italian American, that documentary where he interviews his parents. And like, and he has such an interesting variety of things that he does. But like, it's so interesting, like watching his films and watching the Godfather films, because they do really capture like Italian people in a very authentic and genuine kind of way. Cause like it's a funny running joke for Jess as we're watching it and everyone's going like, hey, it's like, that's it. It's that interaction. And it's just like his first film is like, there's so many scenes of a bunch of dudes like yelling at each other and just being like big, boisterous, and it's like that kind of personality. And I think probably like Goodfellas is definitely one of the ones, like the whole entire scene where Paul Sorvino is like cutting up the garlic with like a razor blade and stuff like that. It's just like that attention to detail with like how important that food is, even if you're sitting in prison. And it's like, I appreciated that about this film because I felt like it really did capture that. And like, unlike some of his other films, it does capture like the religious part of it, because Roman Catholicism is a big part of things. And it's just like, and I feel like I appreciated how that was included here and how that was still a main part of like motivations and stuff like that in this film. And it's so interesting. It's like mentioned before, it's like that's where you meet Charlie, in a church.
Right. In a church, going through a crisis of faith, right?
Yep.
And I wonder, I don't know, maybe Silence was like a passion project for Scorsese for a long time. Was he thinking about that movie all the way back in like 73?
That's interesting. I don't know, but I imagine that was something that like basically he had to wait until he could do whatever the hell he wanted. And he did. And which is very interesting because I loved Silence. It was the #1 film of the year for me that I saw in 2016. And there's some great movies that year. Like that was a great year of cinema for me personally. And I remember sitting and watching that film and nobody saw it. It came out of nowhere. They tried to squeeze it in for Oscar run. They had the trailer released a month and a half before release. They basically did the Netflix thing where it's like, hey, this movie's coming out in a month and a half. You should go watch it. And the irony of him turning up on Netflix for his next film. But the thing is, it's like Silence was a bomb. And
everybody turned up for The Irishman, right? Everybody came out for The Irishman. I think if you're going to do a movie about religious, a crisis of faith, if you will, Silence is far and away a better film than this one is, just because it's just, you're distracted by Italian American life in New York City. You're distracted by the romance, by the booze, the coke, the girls, the possible romance. And fun fact, I don't know if you know this, but the Rolling Stones were criticized roundly, at least early on, because they couldn't write a love song. So I think it's funny that Scorsese loves the Rolling Stones so much. I think Silence would be a better movie if that's what you're looking for.
Yeah.
I far and away.
The Rolling Stones capture the energy of Martin Scorsese a lot too.
And
it's just because they were the bad boys of rock and roll. You had the Beatles and then you had the Stones. And Scorsese felt like one of the bad boys of cinema, doing whatever he wanted. And between him and you have the De Palmas and the Coppolas at the time. And then because you had that side of it, and then you had the George Lucas and Steven Spielberg side of it, because they were all peers of each other, but obviously those two groups were going at different things.
Yeah,
because Spielberg and Lucas were going for the more mainstream, the more popular kind of thing that you can do, and obviously George Lucas made Star Wars, and Spielberg made Jaws and E.T. and Indiana Jones along with George Lucas, and they were the big mainstream blockbuster kinds of things. And then you're getting things like Taxi Driver from Martin Scorsese and Raging Bull, and of course De Palma doing his De Palma thing with Carrie and Scarface, and Coppola. It all came crashing down after Apocalypse Now, but he still had two Godfather films, The Conversation, and what world would The Conversation be one of the biggest films around? And it was very much a 70s kind of film, and Scorsese, I feel really captured that 70s sensibility of filmmaking.
Yeah, it's not really fair to compare just to take Coppola and Scorsese out of that conversation, because they're both Italian Americans. I don't know if Coppola's from the East Coast. Is he? Do you know?
I
know
sure.
De Niro is. I know De Niro and Keitel and Scorsese were all from New York City. So there was definitely a sense of place here. But if you hold this up against The Godfather is more mature. There's a steadier vision behind the movie. There's a steady hand behind the camera. It's not really a fair comparison between the two, but I don't know that Scorsese was really competing with Coppola, And for me, the biggest difference between the two is where The Godfather is kind of grandiose and I don't want to say epic, but it's about a big time mob boss. It's about a real wise guy. The guys in this movie are small time. They're all kind of trying to figure out how to hustle their way from Monday to Wednesday, so there's something to appreciate there for sure.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you're taking very different looks at that same similar kind of thing, because even I feel where Scorsese has gone bigger with some of his mob movies, it's still different. Because Goodfellas doesn't feel like The Godfather. Casino doesn't feel like The Godfather. The Irishman doesn't even feel like The Godfather. And The Irishman just leaves this hopelessness. Just sitting there with you at the end, where it's just yeah, just what are you left with at the end of all of this? But the thing is, The Godfather does have that, especially the part two, because Michael is just left with nothing. What does he have left besides all of his power and money that he's accumulated? Because he lost his wife, doesn't really have a connection with his kids. And obviously they tried to revisit all those things in Godfather Part 3, which wasn't exactly the best way of going about it, but it's still exactly this. That was a high qual, a high-end, big budget kind of look at the mafia and like it is an epic. It feels that scale of a Godfather, and it's like this feels gritty and very grimy on the streets in New York, because it's not like you go to the Corleone compound and just like hanging out with like guards everywhere and stuff like that. Like, no, this is a bunch of guys going to strip clubs and just, jumping up on the stage and dancing around as you have this tracking shot of the camera coming right behind you.
There's definitely a sleazier element to Mean Streets. Yeah. I couldn't really figure out if it was like supposed to be set in 70. I have a couple questions for you. I don't know if you're going to have the answers, but I don't know if this was supposed to be set in 73 or earlier. I kind of felt like it was supposed to be about 10 years earlier, because the music was all kind of 60s. There were only a couple tunes in there from like the 70s. The music was a lot earlier, but then there was the guy came home from Vietnam, so it must have been 73, right? I was trying to date it on the movies. Do you know what the movies were that they were watching in the film? One of them might have been a John Ford movie. But the second one, I have no idea. There's a woman veiled, and she says something about a virgin, and there's a man in a bloody shirt, and there's they come together, and there's some kind of conflict. I don't know what it was.
I remember, because like it's so interesting that you bring up like the movies, because his first film has a whole, like the Keitel's character has a whole entire conversation with this woman trying to connect with her, talking about the Searchers. And like you can tell, like Scorsese's a fan of film. He's a John Ford fan, and like that keeps popping back up.
I wonder if it was the Searchers. It might have been.
I'm trying to think, it could have been.
It was the three of them went to a movie after they hustled some kids for like some cash. It was like $20 or something. Mm-hmm. So they all went to the cinema, and that might have been the movie they were watching. I don't know. But it's kind of a mishmash of 60s music and 79 New York in 1973. It's really early to be going to Vietnam.
The first one they watched was The Searchers, so that's what they were watching.
Oh no, it's not. That was going on through the 60s, I guess. The Searchers was what they were watching, you said?
Yep.
Okay.
So like obviously that had to be coming back after a while, because like right before the scene from The Searchers, there's a street shot of various New York theater marquees, and like because like that's from 56. The Searchers came out.
Yeah, like way before.
Because it was an interesting mix of like that like doo-wop kind of early like kind of like turning of popular music. And it's interesting because it's like, having grown up in a household with my grandparents and a very Italian grandfather, and like basically all he listened to was Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin. And just like, that's a very specific thing. It's like, I question the authenticity of an Italian American restaurant if you go in and you don't hear Frank Sinatra being played in the restaurant. And it's interesting because it's like that. It's that balance of that kind of music that connects with that culture versus that attitude of Scorsese of like having the Stones in there and stuff like that. Because like honestly, like the music's such a big part of his films, and they're always so important. And it makes sense that he made films about musicians and like documentaries and stuff like that, because it always has such a big impact in it. And like obviously it's like once Jumpin' Jack Flash starts cutting it, it's just like, yep, it's the Scorsese movie. Because you just have that feeling of like, I'm hearing the Rolling Stones right now, and there's some sleek camera work, and I'm like, I'm watching a Scorsese movie. What else would
I feel like he picked Jumpin' Jack Flash was a great choice for that scene, but not all the music matched up to the scene in the same way. Mm-hmm. So like there was Derek and the Dominoes song that comes on not too long after that. That's I think it's called You Turned Away. I'd have to look again. But there's a Derek and the Dominoes song,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a like a hidden gem, you know, like you wouldn't hear it on the radio. It's not going to get played to death
Wasn't
like
Layla.
Layla does. Wasn't Layla, but he did use that one at least once later on. But it's one of my favorite Derek and the Dominoes songs. Like he's got great taste.
Yep.
And I feel like he felt a personal connection to this song, was like, I want to use this in my movie. And then
Mhm.
just couldn't quite figure out how to make it fit appropriately. But I'm not going to knock his choice for soundtrack. I love the soundtrack to this movie.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of directors today that caught that same kind of bug that Scorsese has about music. Because, you know, Tarantino, it just everything about his movies trying to figure out like the perfect track to have on. And like you basically want to own every soundtrack of his movies on vinyl. So,
Yeah.
and people like Edgar Wright and James Gunn, like, have
Oh
become,
yeah, James Gunn. That's a good one.
and it's just like it really like the first like early director I could think of where it's just like capturing that popular music in the soundtrack is really Scorsese. And because like film scores were such a big thing, and I don't know if they're as big as like having a soundtrack to a film, because it's like, you know, you try to sell movie trailers on like popular music and big songs. You like forcing in like Bohemian Rhapsody and the Suicide Squad trailer, and just being like, everybody wants to see this. This looks so much fun. And then because Guardians of the Galaxy got everybody thinking about like one-hit wonders of the 70s. So like, and it's interesting that you could tell that there's a lot of like early influences of Scorsese in this that are going to grow in all of his films. And then you realize how much they've influenced other people. And it all kind of like starts here. And I think that's why I feel like this is a really important film for him. It's personal. It's a jumping off point for him in many ways.
Yeah, and it's hard to measure. I'm glad you bring that up. Like it's hard to measure the full influence of Scorsese in society and in the movie industry too. Like you mentioned, trying to sell a movie off of like matching it up to a song. I never thought of Scorsese having anything to do with that, but you may be onto something there. Obviously, yeah, it's hard going back and reading like an old science fiction book, even like 1984.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you might read it and be like, okay, what's the big deal? But then you have to put it in context and look at what came after and be like, none of this would have happened, you know, if Orwell didn't write this, or, you know, if Scorsese hadn't figured out X, Y, and Z by this date, you know. And it's funny, I didn't really think of him as the bad boy of cinema. I thought of him as kind of a hyperactive little guy from the city who, you know, like I never really thought of him as the bad boy of cinema. So I'm glad you bring that up.
Because like the way like how I'm thinking about it is because it's like, think about the biggest, most challenging and controversial films you could think of, like the 70s, and it's like, I don't think you get much bigger than Taxi Driver in terms of that, because like how challenging of a film is that? Like it's a messed up film, and you're put into the mind of somebody who's very far gone and very disturbed, and like to the point where it's like they literally remade it in Joker.
I didn't see Joker yet, so
Joker's,
spoiler alerts there.
well,
But
Joker's basically just a mashup of Taxi Driver and King of Comedy.
okay.
Because you could, oh my god, you can see the Scorsese all over it. I'm like, you can see that from the trailer, you sitting and watching the film. I'm like, and it's so funny because what Martin Scorsese said about like comic book movies and stuff like that, but it's like, you know, the Joker movie is literally like the greatest hits of Martin Scorsese all put together.
Yeah.
And you have that, and which is so interesting because it's like Taxi Driver was up there against Rocky. And what won out? I love Rocky. Rocky's a great film. I don't think enough people give the first Rocky film enough credit for being like more than just like a boxing movie.
It's the only Rocky movie that deserves any credit, like until maybe recent times. But like,
yeah, the Creed films Creed kind of injected a deeper level to them again. Because like it's so, you know what's so interesting, and not to go off on too much of a tangent, but I just watched the trailer for Rocky versus Rocky 4, Rocky versus Drago director's cut.
Director's cut. Oh boy.
So, and you know what's crazy is it seems like an actual film and not a bunch of montages strung together. Because Rocky 4 is nothing but montages. There's like 2 boxing fights and just a string of montages. But like this feels like it had an actual story and depth and like character moments and actually time to breathe based off of the trailer. I'm like, I'm kind of interested in seeing this because like Sylvester Stallone went back and did that. But like there's a grit to Rocky, but when you put that up against like you have a film like Taxi Driver, I don't know if the Academy knew what to do with in 1976. Right. And like it's so interesting because I felt like a lot of Scorsese's films, I don't think the Academy knew exactly what to do with. Because look at Goodfellas. Goodfellas lost to Dances with Wolves, I'm pretty sure.
See, I love that movie. I love Dances with Wolves. But you're right. It is like, but it comes a long way. We're going from kind of the ultra realism of 1970s New York or Philadelphia. Mm-hmm. French Connection too is kind of in that world, isn't it? Which I wasn't a huge fan of.
Which interesting conversations we had about that.
Yes. I feel like you and Vinny had a lot more to say about French Connection than me. But and then in the 90s, I feel like Dances with Wolves was the outlier there. You know, I feel like Goodfellas had already kind of, I don't know, I can't really back that up. I can't say that Goodfellas was like in any kind of a tradition at that point because I can't think of any epic gangster movies that had come out like.
Well, you know what's funny?
Era.
What was also nominated for Best Picture that year was The Godfather Part 3.
Oh, okay, Godfather. But as you say,
like I don't know
on the merits of The Godfather and The Godfather Part 2, probably.
I don't know why that was nominated for Best Picture, but you know, at that time it was a big deal that they made a third Godfather film. But like that was much more of like traditional Hollywood kind of gangster movie because like. Goodfellas is an interesting thing because I know a lot of people, Goodfellas is like the Scorsese film. I have a lot of problems connecting with it because like there's certain things where it's just like it, and like I feel like Scorsese channeled this again in Wolf of Wall Street where it's just like you get to the end and your protagonist is so despicable and we're nothing.
But I agree with you on Wolf of Wall Street there for sure. I feel like there is a tradition there. If we're talking about early 90s, we're talking about kind of Cider House Rules and Shawshank Redemption and movies that span like Forrest Gump would be what, a year or two later?
Yeah, because Goodfellas is 90, Forrest Gump was
character, and then for decades, right? So Goodfellas does kind of fit into not a mold, but there's a type of movie that, you know, that it is, you know, at that time. And Dances with Wolves is not too much different. It's just as epic. I don't think that much time passes in Dances with Wolves, but there's a soft spot in my heart for that one. Yeah.
And I felt like the early 90s were probably like the last breath of the Western being a big part of Hollywood. Because like you know,
it's funny
with Wolves.
I don't even like Westerns. And what was the other one?
Unforgiven, winning Best Picture in 93.
That's a good one. It's a good one. Yeah. I'm not a big Western fan. Even like I love Deadwood.
Mhm.
Uh, and there is a place in my heart for Dancing with Wolves. And I appreciate The Searchers and Stagecoach, the John Ford movies, the classic John Ford movies. But like
Obviously, Scorsese does too.
as a genre, I don't love the Western. So I don't know. I'm having a conversation with myself here. I don't understand why I like Dancing with Wolves so much because I don't really appreciate the genre as much. But then again, the gangster film, I wouldn't say that's my favorite thing either. But Goodfellas was like, yeah, as you say, that was the Scorsese movie. I think for me it was just luck. Like it was always on TV growing up.
Mhm.
So I'd seen the movie like 20 minutes at a time, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And then I had to piece it together in my head. So I saw it Quentin Tarantino style, you know what I mean? I just saw the flashes of the movie and I had to piece it together in my head eventually.
Yeah, I hadn't seen Goodfellas all the way through until I was an adult. And because like I didn't watch Scorsese movies. Like I don't think I really watched any Scorsese movies until I had my cinema class in high school, and like didn't have the best reaction to Raging Bull. And like I started watching, like I remember watching The Departed for the first time my freshman year of college. Because like The Departed had been out for like a good 4 or 5 years at that point. And like seeing that, and I love The Departed, but obviously I think The Departed's a little bit more accessible kind of film than most of Scorsese's movies because it's a little bit more black and white than a lot of his films.
And I think he benefited from having that script already done by those Hong Kong, I don't know their names, the
Yeah,
Hong Kong directors of
Infernal Affairs.
Infernal Affairs. Yeah.
Yep. But like I know it's going to be a fun ride watching all these Scorsese films leading up to his new film, Killers of the Killers of the Flower Moon, I think it is.
Yes, that
And
sounds
yeah,
right. Yeah. Yeah.
and having De Niro and DiCaprio and Jesse Plemons, Brendan Fraser, Jonathan Lithgow, like, and this is a Western that,
Brendan Fraser, really?
yep.
Huh.
Oh, yeah, we're in the middle of the Fraser assance. Legitimately though, like he's back and he was in Steven Soderbergh's latest film that was on HBO Max. He's big on that Doom Patrol show that's on HBO Max, that DC Comics show. And like he's doing pretty well for himself again. He's going to be in Darren Aronofsky's next film, playing a 600-pound man.
Did he get divorced recently? What? Why? Why now?
I don't know because like, well, you could go down a rabbit hole on why Brendan Fraser's career went sideways, which one of them was because of being blacklisted for rebuking sexual advances from people in the Hollywood foreign press.
Really?
Yep. And part of that, and also he had a lot of health issues in terms of like injuries and stuff like that from a lot of the action movies he was doing in like the early to mid 2000s and stuff like that.
Right.
But it's interesting, and I'm excited for Scorsese's new film, and now I'm gonna get to watch all of them
I
because
think it's appropriate. I think it's appropriate that we're talking about Scorsese's other movies after Mean Streets because he just lays so much of himself out there. You'll
Mhm.
probably be able to use this as a touchstone for like pretty much every film you watch from here on out. There's going to be something in this movie that you're like, yeah,
Oh,
that's Scorsese.
there's so many visual connections to the Goodfellas, like so many of them. Watching this film, I'm just like seen that before, and especially now because being this is the second time watching this, and I'm like, I've watched Goodfellas quite a few times at this point now. I've definitely watched Taxi Driver a lot. That's like by far the film that I've probably watched the most out of all of his. And I'm going to be having Matt on for that one
For
in a couple
Goodfellas,
weeks.
great.
So
He definitely figured out that putting some kind of moving vehicle into the mix at a key climax helps to like ratchet up the tension.
mhm.
Yeah, he just touched a chord with Goodfellas, you know? The scene from the prison when they're cooking, that is paced so slowly. I can't picture that being in this movie at all. It doesn't fit in Mean Streets.
Mhm.
The dialogue is kind of frenetic, even when it doesn't make sense. De Niro just going, what, over and over and over again,
Yeah.
you know? Just the whole pace is completely different. But that keeps popping up on my Instagram feed, like, I don't know, every couple months, that scene of them cooking, slicing the garlic with the
Yeah.
razor, and somebody, Henry's got to bring in like the scotch and the wine or whatever.
Yep.
People love that scene. It just resonates with people
Mhm.
in a way that like Mean Streets does maybe very, very briefly, you know.
Mhm. And I guess the last thing that I want to bring up about Mean Streets is just big shout out to Keitel and De Niro because they killed it. Like
They did.
Keitel, that one scene where he's drunk and like gotta have some great drunk acting. And
The close up of his face and it's like turning and twisting.
yes, it's just like you could tell there's a young, ambitious director here, and he was just throwing it all at the wall there.
For sure.
And
Yeah.
definitely by the time Goodfellas rolled around, like almost 20 years later, calm down a bit. And
Yeah, for sure.
then he ratcheted it back up again when he made Wolf of Wall Street, which just feels like this movie stretched for like 3 hours.
Yeah, not. I have complicated opinions about that movie too. Wolf of Wall Street. Fun fact I read earlier today is that De Niro wanted Keitel's part, which was originally supposed to be John Voight's part. So there are so many different kind of alternate realities that could. It's not a dig at Scorsese. That's not a Marvel dig at Scorsese, but still funny. There's so many different ways this could have played out, but mostly I was thinking of De Niro. Like this gives him a chance to really show off kind
Yes.
of his wacky side. He gets to show a little more range because Charlie's got to be steady. He's got to put on a good appearance. He's got to look good. A little melodramatic at times, but I think that's Scorsese more than him just being Keitel. He's not a dramatic actor, really. Not a melodramatic actor is what I mean. But I wonder how De Niro's career would have played out after this movie if he had played Charlie and not Johnny Boy. Because De Niro, kind of all the way through, has picked up these slightly off-kilter roles where there's a little bit of something unexpected,
Yeah.
maybe nefarious, you know, under the surface. So
He's definitely
obviously this worked out well for him.
He's definitely had some interesting roles in Scorsese movies.
In Scorsese movies, for sure, yes.
Doing this, Taxi Driver, because Travis Bickle is what a character. And like the king of comedy, it's such a watching him in that's such a strange thing. And Raging Bull, which just the range of like physicality that he has in that movie. And then something as crazy as the fact that Scorsese made Cape Fear. And you have Max Tweedy.
I've never seen Cape Fear. So Last Temptation's higher on my list for Scorsese, but I've never seen Cape Fear either. So I can't really pass any judgment on Scorsese yet, only watching, you know, the gangster movies, because that's only one side of him. And I think we're agreed that he learned to kind of hone in on certain themes a little better, you know, later in his career.
Yep. And make movies like 2 times as long as this movie. They just keep getting bigger. Need a bigger boat. But obviously we had a lot to talk about with Mean Streets. And shifting gears to wrap things up for this episode of Welcome to the Wasteland is some recommendations. So, Jim, what's a movie you'd like to recommend to everybody listening?
Almost forgot about this. So seeing Harvey Keitel in this movie, young and buff and vibrant, some reason I've been thinking about the movie Youth recently, which is Michael Caine and Harvey Keitel in the lead. Bunch of different actors in that movie, but they're basically in a Swiss chateau wishing they were young again. They're lamenting, being old. And ultimately, Michael Caine and Harvey Keitel take very different kind of approaches to resolving this crisis that they have in their old age. But it's a beautiful movie. All the actors are, great. There's no missteps in this film. And I think Sun Kill Moon does the soundtrack, at least a couple songs in it. So I've been wanting to, recommend that movie to you.
I'm trying to think. I feel like I watched this at some point. I'm pretty sure I watched this at some point. And
also pretty sure you watched this at some point.
Yeah, because I've seen everything. Rachel Weisz is in it, Jane Fonda, Paul Dano. So it has a quality cast. Paolo Sorrentino, the director. I recognize. Oh, he made the New Pope.
I like that movie. I enjoyed.
Yep.
That film.
He
Again,
created that, and that's interesting. That's why. Has that visual flair to it. Boy, does Jude Law. Because the young Pope and then the new Pope between Jude Law and John Malkovich, it's an interesting couple of series that they have on HBO there. But yeah, I think from what I remember of Youth, I think it's a really interesting film and definitely worth checking out. And it makes me happy seeing some of the aging actors doing a meaningful project and not War with Grandpa. And because De Niro's doing it all.
Was that Bad Grandpa? Is that what that movie was?
So De Niro has has Dirty Grandpa that he did with Zac Efron. Bad Grandpa is the Jackass movie where Johnny Knoxville is in old guy makeup, which I find extremely amusing. I had a lot of fun with that movie. Dirty Grandpa, not so much. But then De Niro also had War with Grandpa, where he has a prank war with his grandson. And
I didn't know about this at all.
That came out last year, 2020, and somehow he convinced Christopher Walken, Cheech Marin, and Jane Seymour to all be in this movie too.
Oh, I thought this was like a documentary. This is not a true prank war with his grandson. It's a fictional movie.
No, and his daughter's played by Uma Thurman. And his son-in-law is Rob Riggle. So it's Christopher Walken. It's Christopher Walken, what are you doing in this movie too? And
Christopher Walken should have been in Mean Streets, man. Christopher Walken would have been great in this movie.
Oh, that's a whole other thing of just seeing Christopher Walken not being a caricature and actually acting in a movie. And or being basically a Hitler clone in a James Bond movie. A View to a Kill.
See, A View to a Kill, man, I wanted to like that movie so much.
Oh, it's bad.
It's not a good movie.
Roger Moore was 15 years too old to be playing Bond at that point. He was 57. And it's not like Daniel Craig's around there at this point. But Daniel Craig's in some impressive shape. Roger Moore was just a middle-aged British dude, not doing much at all, just being throwing one-liners out, flirting with Donna's mom from That 70s Show, and Grace Jones, and then having the best part of View. Two best things about View to a Kill. One, Christopher Walken just being ridiculous, because he just had way too much fun making that movie. And two, the theme song from Duran Duran is a jam.
Okay. Fair enough. Yeah, theme songs getting paired with bad movies is like a whole Bond conversation by itself, right? But if Christopher Walken, I don't know. I blame the director. Who was the director on the movie? Who knows?
I
And at least,
legitimately, there's not many Bond directors I could like. I know who Martin Campbell is, who made Goldeneye and Casino Royale. Um, there's what was it, Guy Hamilton or something like that, made like a ton of them. He made a bunch of he made most of Sean Connery's and into some of Roger Moore's, but like and then I know like the new ones because like I know Sam Mendes made two of them.
yeah,
And now Cary Fukunaga from True Detective made No Time to Die. So looking forward to that. But
me too.
just blanket recommendation, go watch a whole bunch of James Bond movies before No Time to Die comes out. But there's two movies that I want to throw out there. One I can't say much about because it's still under embargo is Mass. I just watched this yesterday, and it's a drama about two couples in like the basement of a church having a conversation trying to get past a very traumatic event that connects them. And my God, if Jason Isaacs, aka Lucius Malfoy, aka the asshole Cavalier guy from The Patriot, doesn't get an Oscar nomination for this movie, we riot. And then also Anne Dowd, who is incredible in Handmaid's Tale. She's like the woman that runs all the handmaids. I'm terrible with character names. But like Anne Dowd, she's amazing in it too. That's an incredibly emotional film, and that'll hit you to the core. And it's all like mostly confined to just one space, just a conversation between four people, like the whole entire film. And it's a really impressive and emotional ride. And then the other one I want to recommend, which this is out in limited theaters at this point, is I'm Your Man. And this is from Bleecker Street. Actually, they're both from Bleecker Street. Bleecker Street makes some very quality films. And this is a science fiction romance. So like think Her, except less Spike Jonze, because like Her's very Spike Jonze. But like this film is it's a German film, and it's a scientist. This woman is really needs money for her research and takes up the offer to spend 3 weeks with a robot who's made for companionship to test out if it really works or not. And the robot's played by Dan Stevens, who I know he was in Downton Abbey, but I've never really watched Downton Abbey. I know he was the Beast in the new Beauty and the Beast. He was the main character in The Guest, that a Blumhouse like horror thriller, and like he is fantastic in this movie as this robot. And Maren Eggers, I believe, is the main actress's name, and she kills it. It's a deep, meaningful, it's funny, it's melancholic. It has like, it balances such a great tone about itself, and it's very deep and meaningful. It's obviously it's a flip script from like Her, because it's like a man falling in love with like a woman's voice and stuff like that. But like this is a woman building this connection with this like male robot. But it's very subtle in its like science fictionness. So like there isn't like big effects and stuff like that. But it's really well shot. The storytelling's really impressive. There's an opening sequence that like sets up the whole entire movie that's really well done and interesting and intriguing. So both of those movies like jumped into my top 10 of the year, which I'm anticipating my top 10 to change a lot over the next couple of months, because to be frank, besides all of the movies that came out like in February and March as like late Oscar picks, I don't have a whole lot. Like, I still have like A Quiet Place Part 2 and In the Heights in my top 10 because like there really hasn't been like anything that like really has been killing it except for like a handful of films. So like I'm excited about all the stuff that's going to be coming out. I'm ready. My body's ready. So there we go. So you all should go check out those two films and show Bleecker Street some love because like I feel like I've never watched a Bleecker Street film that wasn't like a classy film. Like, I feel like that's what they should be known for. They make classy films. But that's all we have for you folks on this episode of Welcome to the Wasteland. And I want to thank you, Jim, again for coming on. And I'd be more than happy to have you come back on for another round on here and Welcome to the Wasteland. We'll talk about that. But obviously, you all will see Jim and I again on the Development and Hell podcast for the movie club. And we're going to keep you all in suspense on what we're actually going to be talking about because neither of us know. So there you go. But thanks again, Jim.
You're welcome, sir. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. And thank all of you out there for always tuning in and supporting your Wasteland Reviewer.